When a woman stays on your mind, the universe is telling you this. Psychology tricks. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. Eden Abez. Most men recognize this moment. It happens in the quiet spaces on the drive home, in that late night silence when the TV is off, or in the early morning when your eyes open before the alarm. Out of nowhere, she shows up in your thoughts again. Not like a storm, more like a steady tap on the shoulder. And that's what makes it hard to ignore. You tell yourself it's probably nothing, just memory doing what memory does. But the question keeps circling back. Why her? Why no? Here's the part that surprises a lot of men. When someone stays on your mind, it often isn't the universe at all. It's your brain refusing to file something away. Psychology has a name for this kind of mental loop. Your mind tends to replay people and moments that feel unfinished, conversations you never had, feelings you never said out loud, endings that didn't feel like endings. The brain doesn't like open tabs, so it nudges you, again and again, toward whatever still feels unresolved. Sometimes that unfinished business is regret. Sometimes it's curiosity. Sometimes it's a version of yourself you associate with her, the confident you, the hopeful you, the calmer you. And sometimes it's simply the truth that you cared more than you admitted. That doesn't mean you're obsessed. It doesn't mean you're weak. And it definitely doesn't mean you're destined. It means your mind is trying to make sense of something that mattered. In the rest of video, we'll break down what it really signals when a woman won't leave your thoughts, how memory, emotion, and attachment patterns quietly steer your attention, and what to do with that insight so it helps you instead of haunting you. 1. Your mind is detecting emotional incompleteness. When a woman stays on your mind long after the story should have ended, don't rush to label it fate or destiny. Be calmer, be sharper, because what's really happening is far more psychological than poetic. And your mind is signaling something unfinished rather than something mystical. The male brain dislikes loose ends. That is not philosophy, that is biology. Your mind is designed to close loops, to resolve tension, to file experiences into neat mental folders so you can move forward. When a connection ends without clarity, no honest goodbye, no explanation that satisfies the gut, no moment where truth finally sits still, your brain refuses to let it go. Don't confuse this with love. Be precise. This is emotional incompleteness, and it behaves like an open tab running quietly in the background of your life. You may have shared laughter, deep talks, a feeling that time disappeared when you were together, but then timing interfered, life shifted, or silence arrived without warning. No closure, no final conversation, no sentence that truly ended the chapter. Years later, she drifts into your thoughts at random moments, not because she was perfect, not because the universe is whispering secrets, but because your mind is still asking a question it never got to finish asking. That is how psychology tricks you. It disguises unfinished business as nostalgia, and it dresses mental tension as longing. Another scenario is even more common and more dangerous. You never said what you truly felt. You edited yourself. You waited for a better moment that never came. The words stayed trapped, and now they echo. Your mind replays conversations that never happened, sentences that never left your mouth, and endings that never took shape. Be honest with yourself. This is not romance replaying itself. It is the brain rehearsing a conclusion it never got to perform. The heart wanted expression, the mouth stayed silent, and now the mind keeps revisiting the scene like an unresolved equation. That is emotional math left unsolved. Don't romanticize the loop. Understand it. When men between 35 and 70 experience this, it often feels heavier because life has already taught them that time does not rewind easily. That awareness adds weight to unfinished connections, and the mind reacts by circling back, asking, what if, over and over again. That is female psychology intersecting with male reflection, not because women are mysterious puzzles, but because emotional ambiguity sticks harder than rejection ever does. Clear rejection hurts once. Ambiguity hurts repeatedly. Be clear about this. Your brain is not missing her as a person. It is missing the resolution as an idea. You must not confuse memory with meaning. Memory is sticky. Meaning requires completion. This is why even a short connection can outlive longer relationships in your thoughts. Length doesn't matter. Closure does. Psychology tricks the mind by rewarding certainty and punishing ambiguity, and when certainty never arrived, your thoughts keep knocking on the same door, hoping someone finally answers. This is also why advice about how to fall in love often misses the mark for men in this stage of life, because falling is easy, but finishing is rare. Be disciplined here. Don't chase the feeling. Analyze the structure. Ask yourself what was never said, what was never answered, what ending never arrived. That is where the tension lives. Female psychology teaches us that emotional signals don't always come wrapped in explanations, and male psychology responds by searching for logic in emotional fog. The result is repetition. The mind keeps returning because it believes there is still data missing. Don't let that fool you into reopening doors that were never meant to stay open. Be grounded. Closure does not require another conversation. Sometimes it requires a decision. You must decide to give yourself the explanation you never received. That is maturity. That is power without aggression. When you understand this, the thought of her loses its grip, not because you erased her, but because you completed the story internally. That is how psychology tricks lose their hold. That is how emotional loops close. And that is how you stop mistaking unfinished business for destiny and start understanding your own mind with clarity, calm, and respect for the way human connection truly works. 2. She represents a version of yourself you Mississippi. When a woman stays on your mind, don't rush to assume it's about romance, destiny, or unfinished attraction. Be steadier than that, because sometimes the truth is quieter and far more revealing. Sometimes it's not her you're thinking about at all. It's who you were when you knew her. That is the part most men miss. The memory doesn't pull you back because of her smile or her voice, but because of the version of yourself that existed in that season. You felt lighter then, more confident, more alive. Your steps had rhythm. Your days had direction. Your life had momentum, and you didn't have to force it. Don't ignore that detail. Be honest with yourself. When life later becomes heavier, when responsibilities stack up, when stress dulls your edge or routine replaces excitement, the mind looks backward, not to escape the present, but to remind you of what once worked. That is how memory operates. The brain uses people as emotional bookmarks. It marks moments when you felt aligned, capable, and awake. She becomes the bookmark, not the story. Be clear about this distinction. You are not longing for her presence. You are longing for your own presence in that time of your life. That is why this happens so often to men between 35 and 70. You've lived enough life to recognize patterns. You've had seasons of growth and seasons of survival. When the present feels muted, the mind flips back to a chapter where you felt like a high-value man without having to prove it, when your masculine energy flowed naturally, when you didn't chase validation because you were too busy building momentum. That memory can feel seductive, but don't misunderstand it. It's not asking you to go backward. It's asking you to reclaim something forward. Be precise here. The confidence you remember was not created by her. It was reflected by the life you were living then. You were moving, stretching, engaging with the world. That energy naturally helped you attract women, not through effort, but through presence. Don't reduce that memory to a single person. Expand it. Ask what habits you had, what risks you took, what standards you lived by. That is where the real signal is. The mind doesn't romanticize randomly. It highlights moments where you felt internally aligned. That is why the memory shows up now during quieter or more demanding seasons. It's a reminder, not a regret. You must not confuse nostalgia with desire. Nostalgia is instructional. Desire is directional. One teaches you. The other pulls you. Be disciplined enough to tell the difference. When you understand this, you stop seeing her as the one who got away and start seeing her as a mirror from a time when you were more connected to yourself. That realization changes everything. It turns longing into clarity. It turns reflection into action. You realize that becoming a high-value man again has less to do with changing who you attract and more to do with restoring the internal conditions that once made you magnetic. Be grounded. Masculine energy is not about force or performance. It's about stability, purpose, and self-respect. When you had that, you naturally attract women without trying to convince anyone of your worth. Don't chase the bookmark. Rebuild the book. That is the work. The universe isn't telling you to text her, replay old conversations, or reopen a closed chapter. That is fantasy thinking. The universe is pointing to a version of you that felt alive and asking why you left him behind. Be direct with yourself. What changed? What did you stop doing? What did you postpone indefinitely? The answers are rarely dramatic, but they're always honest. When you act on them, the memory loosens its grip, not because it disappears, but because it has fulfilled its purpose. You've listened, you've understood, and you've moved forward with intention. That is how man regains momentum. That is how masculine energy stabilizes instead of flickering. That is how you attract women again, not by chasing the past, but by embodying the best parts of it in the present. If this message hit home, don't just scroll past it. Be intentional. Like the video, share it with a man who needs clarity, and subscribe for more grounded psychology and real-life wisdom. Then comment this below to lock it in and make it real. I'm not missing her, I'm remembering who I was, and I'm choosing to become him again. 3. Familiarity feels like meaning. When a woman stays on your mind, understand this with absolute clarity. It is not destiny speaking. It is not the universe sending a sign. It is your brain following a familiar loop, and Old Stoic wisdom has warned men about this for thousands of years. The human mind is designed to conserve energy, to reuse pathways, to favor what it already knows, and because of that, it often confuses repetition with importance, familiarity with meaning, and comfort with truth. You think about her while driving, while showering, while walking in silence, not because she was necessarily the right woman for your future, but because your mind has rehearsed her presence so many times that it now feels significant. Repetition creates emotional weight. Emotional weight creates illusion. Illusion feels like connection. This is not romance. This is psychology. Marcus Aurelius stated, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts," and this is not a metaphor, it is a warning. Whatever you replay gains power. Whatever you revisit feels larger. Whatever you repeat begins to feel essential, even when it is not. This is why old relationships feel deeper than they truly were. This is why memories grow warmer with time while the problems fade. The brain edits reality to preserve familiarity, not accuracy. Familiarity feels safe. Safe feels meaningful. Meaning feels irreplaceable. And before you realize it, you are loyal to a memory instead of committed to growth. Modern life amplifies this trap relentlessly. Music triggers memory. Locations trigger emotion. Algorithms resurface faces you did not ask to see. Silence invites the past to speak louder. The mind hates emptiness, so it fills gaps with what it knows best. That does not mean it deserves your future. Seneca warned, "We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than from reality." When a woman stays on your mind, you are not suffering from her absence. You are experiencing the mind's resistance to uncertainty. You are missing a known pattern. You are missing predictability. You are missing a chapter where the rules were familiar, even if they limited you. This is why men stay emotionally attached to situations that no longer serve them. Not because they were perfect, but because they were known. Old Stoic wisdom teaches that clarity is power, and clarity begins when you stop asking emotional questions and start asking disciplined ones. Ask yourself directly, does this thought strengthen me? Does it sharpen my focus? Does it move my life forward? If the answer is no, it is not a signal, it is noise. The Stoics never taught men to suppress emotion, they taught men to rule it. Stoicism win is not about becoming cold, it is about becoming precise. It is about refusing to let the mind run unattended. An iron mind does not drift. An iron mind directs. An iron mind understands that attention is currency, and you do not spend it on what no longer pays dividends. The reason familiarity feels like meaning is because the brain rewards recognition. But recognition is not value. Comfort is not alignment. Repetition is not truth. The disciplined man understands this distinction and acts accordingly. In modern life, where distractions are constant and nostalgia is monetized, mastery requires intention. You must give your mind something greater to carry. Purpose dissolves fixation. Structure weakens obsession. Action erases rumination. When your days are full of meaningful strain, your mind does not wander backward. Build something that demands you. Train your body until fatigue replaces fantasy. Pursue goals that require focus. Responsibility anchors attention in the present. Epictetus said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid, meaning you must be willing to let go of comforting illusions in order to gain real strength. This is where Old Stoic wisdom becomes practical instruction. Do not romanticize repetition. Do not worship memory. Do not confuse emotional familiarity with future value. Stoicism win comes when you stop asking why a thought appears and start deciding whether it stays. An iron mind understands that thoughts are visitors, not commanders. You choose what remains. You choose what shapes you. You choose what defines your next chapter. The universe is not telling you to look backward. Your habits are, and habits respond to discipline. Old Stoic wisdom reminds us that freedom begins when you reclaim authority over your inner world. Stoicism win is earned through daily decisions, not emotional surrender. An iron mind does not chase familiar feelings, it builds unfamiliar strength. And that is how a man stops circling the past and starts commanding the future. 4. She triggers unmet emotional needs. When a woman stays on your mind, don't rush to label it as fate, obsession, or unfinished business. Be more precise than that, because precision is power. Ask yourself one honest question and don't dodge it. What did she make me feel that I am not feeling now? That is where the truth lives. Maybe it was admiration, the quiet kind that made you stand taller without trying. Maybe it was respect, the rare experience of being heard instead of tolerated. Maybe it was desire, not just physical, but the feeling of being chosen, noticed, welcomed into someone's attention. Or maybe it was calm, that deep exhale you didn't realize you'd been holding for years. Be clear about this. Your mind isn't clinging to her face, her voice, or her habits. It's circling an emotional signal she activated. She listened without judgment, and that alone can feel revolutionary to a man who's spent decades being strong, reliable, and invisible. She made you feel seen after years of being overlooked, not because others were cruel, but because life slowly trains men to shrink their emotional expectations. Don't confuse the messenger with the message. This is one of the most misunderstood psychology tricks of the human mind. We attach memory to emotion, then mistake the emotion for the person. That is not romance. That is unresolved need. Be honest. If she disappears tomorrow, what you would miss most is not her presence, but the version of yourself that came alive around her. That is female psychology at work in its most subtle form, not manipulation, not mystery, just emotional resonance. You must understand this if you want clarity instead of confusion. When the mind lacks a certain emotional nutrient, it will replay the last source that provided it again and again, like a song stuck on repeat. Don't fight the thought. Study it. That repetition is not a sign you should chase her. It's a signal you should develop what's missing. Until that need is met elsewhere, through growth, through meaningful connection, through purpose that sharpens your sense of self, your thoughts will keep circling back because the mind hates emotional debt. Be careful here. This is where many men confuse longing with love and nostalgia with destiny. That confusion is expensive. It costs time, dignity, and peace. One of the quieter psychology tricks is this. The brain will romanticize whoever gave relief during a dry season. That doesn't mean she is the only source. It means she arrived at the right moment. Understand how to fall in love with awareness instead of illusion. Love is not the spark alone. It is the structure that sustains the feeling after the spark fades. If she made you feel respected, you must build a life where respect is standard, not rare. If she made you feel desired, you must reconnect with your vitality, your body, your ambition, not outsource that feeling to one person. If she brought calm, then chaos has been living rent-free in your routine, and that is what needs attention. Don't wait for another woman to fix what only alignment can solve. Be disciplined. Be curious. Be brave enough to say, this feeling is pointing me inward, not backward. That is maturity. That is how to fall in love without losing yourself. When men understand female psychology at this level, they stop chasing echoes and start creating presence. They stop asking, why can't I forget her? And start asking, what part of me is asking to be restored? Answer that, and the grip loosens. Ignore it, and even new relationships will feel oddly familiar because unmet needs don't disappear, they just change phases. This is not about suppressing emotion. It's about graduating from confusion to clarity. Use these psychology tricks not to manipulate others, but to read yourself accurately. Be grounded. Be intentional. And remember this, when a woman stays on your mind, it's rarely about her. It's about the emotional door she opened and whether you choose to walk through it on your own. If this message hit home, don't scroll past it. Like the video, share it with a man who needs clarity, and subscribe for more insight on psychology tricks, female psychology, and how to fall in love with awareness instead of confusion. Now interact with the channel by commenting this sentence below to lock it in your mind. I don't miss her. I miss the way she made me feel, and I'm responsible for creating that feeling again. 5. The mind romanticizes what is no longer accessible. Distance does something dangerous to the mind, so don't underestimate it and don't romanticize the process while it's happening. When someone is no longer accessible, emotionally or physically, the brain doesn't sit quietly and accept the loss. It fills the empty space with imagination. That is what the mind does best. Distance enhances fantasy, not because the past was perfect, but because the present feels unfinished. Be clear about this. When you can't reach someone, you start reaching for meaning instead. You replay moments. You polish memories. You turn fragments into symbols. This isn't love growing stronger. This is absence doing its work. A man who understands this stays grounded. A man who doesn't get pulled into stories that never fully happened. That difference alone separates confusion from clarity, and it's one of the quiet habits of a high-value man who refuses to live in illusions. You remember her smile, but forget the arguments. You remember the spark, but forget the silence that followed it. That contrast matters. The mind is selective under emotional pressure. It keeps what soothes and trims what unsettles. That is not honesty. That is self-protection. Your brain is not lying to you out of cruelty. It's trying to preserve emotional safety. It edits reality the way a movie editor cuts scenes to keep the story watchable. Long pauses disappear. Tension fades. Discomfort gets trimmed. What remains feels warmer, simpler, and more meaningful than it ever was in real time. Don't confuse a highlight reel with a full relationship. Be disciplined here. Nostalgia is powerful, but it's incomplete by design. If you want to attract women with confidence instead of confusion, you must see memory for what it is, a comforting reconstruction, not a reliable witness. This is where many men lose their footing. They assume intensity equals importance. They assume longing means destiny. Don't make that mistake. Longing often grows strongest when access is gone, not when connection is healthy. The mind craves closure, and when it can't get it, it creates fantasy instead. That fantasy can feel profound. It can feel poetic. It can even feel spiritual. But feelings alone don't tell the full story. Be honest with yourself. If the connection was as aligned as your memory now suggests, distance wouldn't feel this dramatic. The silence wouldn't feel this loud. A man rooted in masculine energy doesn't chase echoes. He evaluates patterns. He asks, was this consistent or was it intense? That question alone can save years of emotional wandering. The danger isn't remembering her. The danger is forgetting yourself while doing it. When the mind romanticizes what is no longer accessible, it quietly shifts your focus backward. Your standards blur. Your present shrinks. You start measuring today against a memory that has been cleaned of its complications. That is unfair to you and unfair to anyone new who enters your life. Be steady. The past doesn't need to be erased. It needs to be put in its proper place. A high-value man honors experiences without worshiping them. He learns from them without living inside them. That mindset is attractive. It creates calm. It creates direction. And yes, it helps attract women who are aligned with who you are now, not who you were during a moment of emotional intensity. You must understand this if you want real progress. The mind's habit of romanticizing distance isn't a flaw, it's a mechanism. Once you see it clearly, it loses its grip. You stop replaying only the good moments and start remembering the full picture. You remember why certain conversations never went anywhere. You remember the effort imbalance. You remember the version of yourself that felt uncertain instead of centered. That clarity doesn't harden you, it stabilizes you. From that place, masculine energy becomes quiet and grounded, not performative. You move forward without resentment. You connect without desperation. You attract women not because you are chasing meaning, but because you are living it. So don't fight the memory. Reframe it. Let it teach you instead of trap you. Be present enough to say, this felt powerful because it was unfinished, not because it was perfect. That is emotional intelligence. That is strength without force. And that is how a high-value man grows, by choosing truth over fantasy, direction over distraction, and a full life over a polished memory. 6. You're projecting future hope onto a past symbol. When a woman stays on your mind, understand this clearly. It is not always about her, and Old Stoic wisdom tells us that the mind reaches for symbols when life demands decisions we've delayed, because sometimes a woman becomes the embodiment of hope, possibility, and renewal rather than a real, present human being. And at this stage of life, between career pivots, family responsibility, changing identity, and the quiet pressure of time, you are often standing at a crossroads whether you admit it or not. The mind, seeking certainty, reaches backward for a moment that once felt alive, promising, unfinished, and assigns that emotional charge to her, turning her into a placeholder for the future you crave rather than the past you must release. And Marcus Aurelius warned of this when he said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts," meaning if you allow longing to masquerade as destiny, you surrender clarity. But if you master your perception, you master your direction, which is why Stoicism win is never about suppressing feeling but about commanding it, because modern life constantly pushes men to look outside themselves for meaning, through relationships, memories, or imagined reunions. Yet the disciplined man knows that fixation is often a signal, not a solution, and the signal is this: something in your present requires courage, action, and leadership. Maybe it's the courage to redefine your purpose after years of providing for others. Maybe it's the resolve to step into a new professional identity when the old one no longer fits. Maybe it's the quiet acknowledgement that time is finite and comfort is no longer enough. And Seneca said it best: we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Because the image of her becomes polished, simplified, stripped of complexity, while real progress remains demanding and unfinished. And this is where the iron mind is forged, not by indulging fantasy, but by translating emotional energy into decisive movement, because longing is raw fuel, and fuel must be directed or it burns without progress. Understand this instruction clearly. If she represents a future you want, then build the future directly. Don't chase the symbol. And if she represents youth, vitality, or freedom, then embody those qualities now through discipline, health, learning, and purpose. Because the past cannot deliver what only the present can construct, and Epictetus reminds us: don't explain your philosophy. Embody it, which means you stop asking what she means and start asking what your life is demanding. And in today's world, where distractions are constant and nostalgia is marketed as comfort, the man who wins is the one who chooses clarity over sentimentality, action over rumination, structure over wishful thinking, because Stoicism win is built on the refusal to outsource meaning to another person, and instead reclaiming authorship of your own direction. And this does not diminish respect for her. It restores respect for yourself, because projecting future hope onto a past symbol delays growth and clouds judgment, while decisive self-command sharpens vision and restores momentum. And when you redirect your focus inward, something powerful happens. Your standards rise, your patience strengthens, your decisions become cleaner, and the emotional noise fades, replaced by calm authority. And as Nietzsche observed, he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow, which means once you reconnect with your purpose, fixation dissolves naturally, without force, without denial, because the mind no longer needs substitutes, and this is the victory state, quiet, grounded, forward moving, where old Stoic wisdom meets modern execution, where the iron mind refuses to be dragged by memory and instead uses memory as information, not instruction, and when you reach this point, you no longer ask why she lingers in your thoughts. You know the answer, you've extracted the lesson. And you've moved on stronger, clearer, and in command because mastery is not about erasing feeling. It's about directing it toward building a life that no longer needs symbols to feel meaningful. And that is how you win, calmly, decisively, and on your own terms. If this message hit home, take action now, like the video, subscribe for more sharp psychological insight, and share it with a man who needs clarity instead of confusion. Most importantly, lock this lesson into your mind by commenting the line below, because what you repeat is what you become. Comment to remember, I stop chasing symbols and start building the future I want. 7. Your intuition is asking for self-reflection, not action. Here is the truth most men miss when a woman stays on your mind longer than feels reasonable, longer than feels logical, longer than feels safe. Your intuition is not pushing you toward action, it is pulling you toward awareness. And that difference matters more than you think. Don't rush. Don't assume the universe is nudging you to call, text, or reopen a door you already closed. Be still first. That is where the real message lives. Persistent thoughts are rarely instructions. They are signals, and psychology tricks often hide this in plain sight because the mind prefers motion over meaning. When her face keeps appearing in quiet moments, when her name drifts in uninvited, when memory taps your shoulder while you're driving or lying awake, the mind may be using her image as a mirror, not a map. Before you reach for your phone, stop and ask yourself the questions that actually matter. What am I avoiding right now? What conversation, decision, or responsibility have I been postponing? What change am I resisting because it feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar? You must be honest here. No performance, no self-justification, just clarity. The mind often attaches emotional energy to a person when something inside your life is out of alignment, and female psychology shows that attraction is not only about desire, but about reflection. People become symbols for unmet needs, unfinished chapters, or parts of yourself asking for attention. That is why the message is not go back, even when nostalgia feels convincing. The message is pay attention. Pay attention to the areas of your life that feel stagnant. Pay attention to the routines that no longer energize you. Pay attention to the version of yourself you may be neglecting. This is one of those psychology tricks that sounds mystical until you recognize how practical it is. The mind uses familiar faces to flag internal imbalance because faces are easier to focus on than feelings. Don't confuse emotional intensity with direction. Be disciplined. Be reflective. That is how you regain control without suppressing anything. Many men believe that learning how to fall in love means chasing emotion, but mature understanding shows the opposite. It means understanding what emotion is pointing toward before acting on it. If you skip this step, you repeat patterns instead of resolving them. If you honor it, you grow. Ask yourself whether the thoughts increase when you feel uncertain, bored, disconnected, or unchallenged. Notice the timing. Notice the context. That is not coincidence. That is information. Female psychology often reveals that attraction lingers strongest when something feels unresolved, not necessarily with her, but within you. This is why reaching out too quickly often brings temporary relief followed by deeper confusion. Don't do that. Don't outsource clarity to another person. You must claim it yourself. Sit with the thought long enough to hear what it is actually saying. Is it asking you to change direction? Is it asking you to reclaim confidence? Is it asking you to confront a fear you've been neatly avoiding? When you answer those questions, the thought often loosens its grip because it has been acknowledged. That is how psychology tricks work when used wisely. They are not about manipulation, they are about interpretation. And when you understand this, how to fall in love stops being about chasing a person and starts being about aligning your life so love fits naturally instead of forcefully. Be aware that the mind prefers familiar stories, even if they no longer serve you, and that is why certain people linger in memory longer than others. That does not make them destiny. It makes them symbols. Treat them as such. Reflect before you react. Choose insight over impulse. This approach respects you, respects her, and respects the deeper intelligence guiding your thoughts. When you learn to read these signals correctly, psychology tricks become tools. Female psychology becomes insight rather than mystery, and how to fall in love becomes less about urgency and more about readiness. 8. Your mind is testing whether you've truly moved on. When a woman stays on your mind, especially after time has passed, understand this clearly. Your mind is not betraying you, it is testing you, and this test is one of the most important markers of growth a man can experience. The brain performs what psychologists call a return check, not to drag you back into the past, but to measure whether you have truly advanced beyond it. And this is where Old Stoic wisdom becomes practical instead of theoretical. Because as Marcus Aurelius said, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, and the question now is whether your thoughts still carry emotional charge or whether they pass through you without control. You notice her image surface, and something is different. There is less pull, less urgency, more neutrality. And that shift matters because neutrality is strength, neutrality is progress, neutrality is evidence that your inner structure has been rebuilt. This is not relapse, this is confirmation. The same way a seasoned athlete tests an old injury not to reopen it, but to verify it no longer limits movement. And in modern life, where memories are triggered by algorithms, photos, locations, and late night silence, this test happens more often. Yet the outcome depends on the iron mind you have forged. You imagine seeing her again and realize, without drama, that you would not trade your current life, your routines, your clarity, or your future for a return to what once was. And that calm realization is the mind quietly asking, does this still have power over you? Because the mind is efficient and it only revisits what still holds influence. If the answer is no, the thought fades on its own, without force, without effort, like smoke leaving an open room. And if the answer is yes, the signal is not about her at all. It is about unfinished internal alignment, habits, self-respect, or purpose, which is why Epictetus warned, no man is free who is not master of himself, a line that speaks directly to this moment. Closure, real closure, rarely arrives through conversation, explanations, or apologies in today's fast-moving world. It arrives through self-awareness, through the realization that your emotional center is no longer outsourced. And this is where Stoicism win becomes more than a phrase. It becomes a lifestyle choice. Because winning here does not mean suppressing feeling, it means understanding it so thoroughly that it cannot disrupt your direction. Modern men. Between responsibility, relationships, and legacy often misread lingering thoughts as weakness, but that assumption is outdated because a trained mind revisits the past the way a commander reviews old battles, not with regret, but with learning. This is why Old Stoic wisdom emphasizes observation over reaction, clarity over impulse, and as Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than in reality, which applies perfectly when a memory no longer produces suffering but merely information. The instruction is simple and direct. Do not panic when the thought appears. Do not dramatize it. Do not assign meaning too quickly. Observe the emotional response. Measure it, and let that data inform your next internal adjustment. Because mastery is not the absence of thought, it is authority over response. In a world full of noise, distractions, and emotional shortcuts, developing an iron mind is the ultimate advantage, and this advantage compounds with age, experience, and discipline if the thought still carries weight. Then refine your routines, strengthen your purpose, invest deeper in your health, your mission, and your daily structure, because unresolved attachment dissolves when a man's life becomes full and intentional if the thought carries no weight. Then recognize the victory quietly, because Stoicism win is silent, internal, and unshakable. Repeat this process without judgment, without rush, and without self criticism, because growth is not loud, it is consistent. As Nietzsche observed, he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow, and when your why is solid, old emotional echoes lose relevance. This is how men master their inner world in modern life. This is how memory becomes measurement instead of disturbance. This is how Old Stoic wisdom proves timeless. This is how Stoicism win becomes personal reality. And this is how an iron mind is built, not by avoiding thoughts, but by passing every test they bring and walking forward, unchanged, steady, and in control. Hey friends, thanks for staying with me till the end. Here's a simple, honest takeaway. When someone keeps returning to your thoughts, don't rush to label it fate or romance. Pause. Ask yourself what that repetition is pointing to inside you: an unmet need, a lesson, or a pattern asking to be understood. That kind of self questioning isn't weakness, it's emotional intelligence. The more clearly you understand yourself, the less power old memories have over you. If this message connected with you, drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Subscribe if you appreciate calm, grounded psychology over hype. And remember, real clarity doesn't come from reliving the past, but from learning exactly what it came to teach you.